Item number 5 is the ordinance amending the administrative code to require Board of Supervisors approval of a policy governing the funding, acquisition, and use of certain law enforcement equipment consistent with the criteria set forth in state law and approving the police department's use of equipment policy.
Okay, colleagues, I want to thank you and the public and the police department for your patience as we have heard this repeatedly. The good news is the department has evolved their AB481 military equipment policies largely in line with the comments that I made a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if I am the only one, but I generally delve into these things on Sunday evening, and by the time I delve through the entire grid that the police department provided us late last week, maybe Friday or so, it was like 10 o'clock, and I thought, nah, too late to call the PD and start negotiating. So I want to make some comments based on the responses, and I think we are all in receipt of this fine, good work to Aja Steves and the department for laying it all out, and you can see who made the suggestion, which is largely me, some from the PD, and you can see that some of them were accepted in whole, some of them were accepted in part, some of them were declined in whole, but a lot of progress. And you know, this is the first time that any of us are doing this. I actually noted that this is a law that was sponsored by our now city attorney and former state assembly member David Chu. So if we want legislative intent, we can just walk down the hall and find out first person. But with that, what I would like to do is just go through some thoughts that I jotted down last night, too late to call, and then I have arranged for a meeting between myself and the department on Wednesday morning to discuss these at length. And then hopefully we can finally, albeit we are past the 180-day deadline, but we are not the only ones in the state of California to be wrestling with this. So in order that they appear on this, I note that as it relates to robots, I asked a question at a previous meeting about whether or not robots could be used for deadly force. The department has responded that yes, they can under prescribed limited circumstances. So I think that's a question for us relative to AB 481, whether or not we agree with that. So we can, I mean, that's something, as a matter of fact, this would be a good opportunity because we cannot talk about this offline. Colleagues, if you have any sentiments as to that, you might want to express them during the course of this meeting. There was relative, this is R3, page number 5, whether or not it should be command staff, which is what I recommended. The department suggested commissioned officers, which are lieutenant or above. I note that Oakland, I believe in their policy, they're a little bit ahead of us, landed, I think, on command staff could only authorize deployment in these instances. So something to think about and discuss. As to the Bearcat, I guess the question that I was left with is really defining what is a high-risk tactical situation. I mean, I think we all kind of have a sense of it, but it's not, for the sake of the policy, defined. Obviously, I think we all want de-escalation whenever and wherever possible. I think the policy speaks to the fact that de-escalation has been deemed to be futile. But anyway, that's some food for thought. Jumping all the way to my favorite device, the LRAD. It's actually, you guys included language, which I appreciate, that said it would not be used for crowd control. And so I think that in the authorized uses, we should say that that is not an authorized use, because it's, I think I'm just restating what you guys were saying, but we can figure that out on Wednesday. And by the way, there also is, and I have not yet looked into this, another new California law, I think AB481, that we need to look at in light of LRAD. We can talk about that further on Wednesday. Jumping to specialized firearms, I think the city attorney has said that can be deleted. It's in its entirety or not. That's a policy call for us. So any thoughts that colleagues have as to whether or not we want to delete that, speak now. That does not mean that you need to forever hold your peace. But it is a place where we have an opportunity, again, to emphasize and speak to de-escalation if it is in the policy, whereas if we make the line call and say it's not in the policy, those words don't have a place. So I lean towards keeping it in the policy, which is our call. Jumping to R24, I think we have some AB481 questions, which we need to get our arms around and figure out. R26, I just have some questions about destruction of property as it relates to the definition of exigent circumstances. I am reluctant to, unless it's better defined, say that destruction of property could trigger. I mean, if a person is smashing a window, which is not good, I don't know that it's okay to shoot them. But that, I'm not saying that you would do that. I'm saying that the way destruction of property is listed in here gives me pause.
Sure, this can rise to arson. It can rise to hostile crowds where their barricades are being broken, vehicles are being broken, buses are being taken over, things are being lit on fire. So we're talking about large destruction of property.
Right, and so I think if we say that mass scale, I mean, look, we all saw what happened in our nation's capital on January 6th with barricades and destruction of property. So I get it. It's just, maybe it just requires some language tweaking. Then the, and I think this kind of gets me pretty much maybe through it, the restocking at $10 million, which happens to be the section 9.118 threshold, wherein you would have to come anyway. We need to discuss that. And then I think AB 481 specifically does require, and I put this language in and you guys took it out, that it has to identify an independent oversight body. I identified the Board of Supervisors, which seemed to be where AB 481 was pointing, although it could be the Police Commission, but it has to, I think it has to identify. I think that is pretty clear in the law. So I don't think, I mean, we can have a different oversight agency, but I think you can't just strike that language, is the way I read the law. I'm not an attorney.
And we're talking about the restocking section, correct?
No, this is R 28. I can
Right, compliance and sanctions. I see.
It's,
So police commission is folded into that when, in terms of the compliance of member compliance. Police commission is already folded into any discipline action along with the chief. So if we're talking about compliance with the government code 771D, I believe, I think we already acknowledge that the Board of Supervisors would be that governing body.
okay, well, if you can show me where, then maybe we're good.
So we added a section at the last page, page 20.
Page 20.
So we essentially folded it into the annual report, not the compliance section, which just says that it is the Board of Supervisors within their purview to oversee the compliance of that government code section.
All right, we can quibble about this. I see your Section 6 annual reporting. I still don't think it has the magic words of who is the ultimate oversight authority, but, and we can also talk to council about whether I'm right or not in my reading of AB481. Or I can just go ask David Chu. It's amazing that David Chu was able to get this passed in the assembly, but automated speed enforcement still can't be passed. I just can't. I'm trying to get this is not a comment on the PD. This is a comment on the state legislature. I can't figure out the state legislature, but what do I know? I've just been a city councilman for the last 20 years. That is, I reserve my right to bring up anything else on Wednesday, but that is kind of it at a high level. And colleagues, if you want to add, subtract, go for it. If not, why don't we open this item number 5 up to public comment? And to members of the public, I will include in the file, as we did previously, the most recent grid that the PD supplied to members of this committee on Friday, so people can look at it in the intervening week.
Yes, I'd just like to note I did post that earlier this morning into Legistar.
Excellent. One less thing for me to give you.
Yes, members of the public who wish to speak on this item and are joining us in person should line up to speak now along the side of the should line up to speak at this time. For those listening remotely, please call 415-655-0001. Enter the meeting ID of 2488-987-7754, then press pound and pound again. Once connected, you will need to press *3 to enter the speaker line. For those already in the queue, please continue to wait until the system indicates you've been unmuted, and that will be your cue to begin your comment. We have a person in the room for public comment. You have 2 minutes for public comment.
Hi, my name's Arthur Koch. I'm a member of the San Francisco Friends meeting serving on the Peace and Social Concerns Committee. We have a Quaker Meeting House right over on South 9th Street, 65 South 9th Street. So I'm here to represent the meeting. I'm asking the Board of Supervisors to call for further amendment of the proposed military equipment policy to fully define authorized use for all weapons, especially assault weapons. I object to assault weapons being considered standard issue, as well as machine guns. I think they should be in the inventory, and I think they should be accounted for. We need to align the receipt of annual reports and budgets, require transparency and restocking, no blank checks for up to $10 million. That's a lot of money not to keep a track of. As a Quaker pacifist, I don't think the SFPD should have so many weapons of war. We are a city of peace, not a military. I think the proposed policy is morally and ethically wrong. This policy doesn't safeguard the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, or civil liberties. And AB481 requires governing bodies to only approve the use of the policy if it will safeguard the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties. I visited a friend in Visitation Valley a couple of years ago, one of the poorest neighborhoods in San Francisco, and I witnessed a military-style armored vehicle making a drug bust at his neighbor's house. It was shocking and seemed way out of proportion to me, like it was a different reality than other neighborhoods in San Francisco. I was more afraid of the police than all the poverty and crime that surrounded me. Breaching devices should not be deployed against a person. It should only be used on doors.
Speaker time has elapsed.
Can I make one last statement?
Please wrap up.
Military equipment is more frequently deployed in low-income Black and brown communities, meaning the risks and impacts of police militarization are experienced most acutely in marginalized communities. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any additional members of the public for comment on item number 5?
There being no additional parties in the room, we can move on to our call-in phone number where we have approximately 6 members of the public in line.
First speaker, please.
Can you hear me now?
Please proceed.
Great. David Pilpel again. On this item yes, Victor did upload the department's submission this morning. That's great. But also in Legistar Attachment 21, which is the committee packet for today, should have today's date, and it still has last week's. I think it is better for the police to have some of this equipment and not use it than to not have it and need it in the event of some event that requires it. So that's where I fall on the acquisition or holding the equipment. My understanding is that this doesn't change what the police has. It just makes the list of that equipment publicly transparent and to some extent does govern its use in a way that did not exist before. So it's really more about transparency than additional potential militarization of the police. And I certainly hope that the Sheriff's Department policy, which is pending before this committee, and any other AB481 policy gets similar scrutiny to the police departments. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller?
Hi, this is Jennifer Tu. I work for the American Friends Service Committee. I'm calling to urge this committee to include assault rifles in this policy. The public deserves to know the fiscal impact of SFPD's 15 machine guns, 64 submachine guns, the 608 assault rifles, and to have policies that protect the public. Use of the assault rifles by SFPD have led to deaths in the city, including this year. Automatic fire weapons are indiscriminate. The public deserves to give input on how such deadly weapons will be used, and that input is provided by AB481. I also urge this committee to consider setting the annual report receipt to occur in the spring. The new law, AB481, requires reporting on the total annual cost for each type of military equipment, and that includes not just the acquisition cost, but also personnel, training, maintenance, and more. These are outlined in the law. That means that SFPD will need to be able to answer questions that account for personnel costs, especially around training and maintenance. These questions include things like how many personnel devoted how many hours towards training on each weapon? What was the cost of that personnel time? How many hours were devoted by all personnel towards cleaning rifles and guns, towards cleaning or maintenance on every weapon that's described? Were any of these questions done at an overtime rate? By setting a due date for the annual report in the spring, this will not only better align with the annual budget process for the city, it will also help SFPD be able to identify what changes it needs to make in its record-keeping practices. And it will allow SFPD to be able to work with a smaller set of data, and that will mean they'll be more able to fully deliver on the law's requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller, please?
Hello?
Hi, please proceed.
Hi, my name is John Lindsay Poland. I'm with the American Friends Service Committee, and my comment is very brief. The proposal from SFPD to make fully automatic machine guns and submachine guns a standard issue and therefore exempt from AB481's requirement for use policy and reporting on those weapons is totally unique in the state. There are many other departments, and I should back up and say American Friends Service Committee has reviewed more than 100 police department and sheriff's policies for AB481, including their use of firearms and whether they classify assault weapons as firearms. The vast majority, more than 90% of both police departments and sheriff's offices include assault weapons, semi-automatic rifles, in their use policies for AB481. Some of them even say, well, we consider it a standard issue, but we, in the interest of transparency, will include this. There was at least one department where the legislative body, the governing body, said, you didn't include assault rifles. We want you to include it, which is under AB481, part of the authority of the governing body to say, okay, this is not included in AB481 by law, but we want you to include it. And San Francisco has the ability to do that. On the issue of machine guns and submachine guns, there are many departments that have such firearms, such weapons. None of them have classified them as standard issue. Every single department I'm aware of that has those types of firearms have included them in their AB481 policy. It is atrocious that this department would attempt to classify these weapons as standard issue and exclude them from oversight.
Speaker time has elapsed. Thank you very much. Can we have our next caller, please?
And I'm speaking for Progressive Labor Party. Hello, everyone. Let's cut to the chase. What are the police for? It's certainly not to stop crime or to protect us. Remember Uvalde? No, the police kill us with impunity. They bust down our doors. They stop and search us. They break up our demonstrations. They spy on us. They're basically hired killers to keep a tiny ruling class in power. Now they want military weapons. Why? Well, millions are becoming homeless. Our kids don't have enough food. Schools are chaos or prisons. We can't get health care. We can't afford food or gas. And now they're preparing for a war with Russia and China that will gut our social services. The police want military weapons because the bosses are afraid of massive rebellion. And they're right, we will rebel. But we need to go beyond rebellion. We need a communist revolution to get rid of capitalism permanently and not have to fight the same battles over and over and over again. Elections will not do it. We can do it. All of these fights today against militarizing the police, against school closings, against evictions, they can bring us together and teach us how to fight. But let's keep our eye on the prize, driving out the bosses with working class revolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller, please?
Good morning. This is Regina Sneed. I'm with Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Arthur Koch, Jennifer Chu, and John Lindsay Poland have already talked about issues that I was going to raise, so I'm going to focus in on a couple of other things. One is I want to thank Chair Peskin for continuing this item, continuing to dialogue with the police department to get more specific information into this policy, and that the board is going to make policy decisions that are important to this ordinance. We need more definitions of the
Ms. Sneed? Ms. Sneed?
This is available to us early enough so that we actually could review that. And I followed very easily the comments made by Chair Peskin because of that document. I will look forward to seeing the responses after Wednesday's meeting with the police department. I would like you to ask the police department about two other items. One is the $10 million figure. As you mentioned, that's kind of standard, so it really needs to be a smaller amount. I still think it's a great idea to have an earlier report along the budget cycle starting in the beginning of the year up to March, so that we have an early indication of how this policy is playing out in terms of an annual report. So those are basically the things, and you have my written comments for more detail. I appreciate that you're taking the time to make sure that we get a policy that is the one that the city deserves as a city of peace, and that I know we're past the deadline, but it's more important to get it right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller, please?
Hello, my name is Paul Briley, and I live in San Francisco in District 10. I represent All of Us or None, Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. I asked the Board of Supervisors to call for further amendment of the proposed military equipment use policy to fully define authorized use for all weapons, especially the assault weapons. These weapons have historically been misused. I asked the board to examine the continuous sequence of policies which have led to the assault upon an unknowing African-American community. Restrictive covenants made a heavy presence of police in my neighborhood to make sure people stayed within these boundaries. And this goes all the way back to the killing of Matthew Johnson, a 16-year-old unarmed boy in Hunters Point. I heard the supervisor mention destruction of property. Matthew Johnson was in a stolen car and he was murdered. The mayor at the time, John Shelley, authorized state-sanctioned violence against the entire community using military equipment. I was not alive at the time, but I grew up in a neighborhood with tanks driving around, being used against the community. I grew up in a neighborhood where AR-15s were pointed at me, telling me to go inside the house. I please ask the board to look at this matter because it will impact the entire community which I live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller?
Yes, good morning. Tracy Krisenberg from Open Privacy and from Media Alliance. Good morning again, and thanks for the work that's been done so far. I just wanted to express three quick concerns. Number one, the restocking fee at $10 million. That's a large amount of money and potentially could represent a significant increase in volume. So we would ask you to look at lowering that number. Secondly, Assembly Bill 48, which passed in the same year as Assembly Bill 481, restricts the use of chemical weapons, flashbangs, beanbags, and those kinds of things in crowd control. It significantly restricts it, and we ask you to integrate these policies with AB 48. Lastly, I believe that currently we have robots authorized for deadly force, which potentially could be used to remote control kill someone. This is what Oakland considered and sort of stepped back from because it's really scary. And I would ask that San Francisco also consider stepping back from having that kind of equipment authorized for basically remote control killing. So thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller, please?
Hello. My name is Deja Bowler. I'm a community activist of many years. I've printed out and read the law enforcement use of equipment policy and the recommended edits of AB 481. And I'm interested to have heard the comments that have been made before me. And I want to say, too, that I appreciate greatly the hard work that Supervisor Peskin has done in dealing with what's put before him. But I want to say that I find this a bizarre way to deal with our fear of the other. We, at present, in our community and our nation, are faced with a lot of unrest. And to overreact to that by way of allowing expenditures to the police department that can result in serious harm to members of our public is really unthinkable. So I oppose the renewal of the policy. I support the use of the funds used heretofore for supply and to the use of any military weapons for city and instead used for social services and unmet community needs. Furthermore, I would like the proud city of San Francisco to send a message to the federal government, legislators, the weapons manufacturers, the U.S. military, the police force itself, and the general public that we do not want or need military weapons to handle our civic affairs and prefer to use the funds for police training in community relations, nonviolent interventions, and management of law enforcement, and in addition, meeting community needs. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all great luck.
Thank you. Can we have our next caller, please?
So real quick, this is Uzuri again from Detroit. And so, oh my God. So first off, we always have a whole bunch of people that don't even live in San Francisco that always want to come on and advocate for what's going on in San Francisco. We really need to stop that. Number two, the police are not, there are a lot of good police officers. I just seen them last night when we had 5150, my neighbor, where they were able to do it with compassionately and not with assault rifles. Then also, the police are outgunned. And so when you're saying that the criminals are taking over the streets, we need to look at why are we not holding other agencies accountable for the work that they're supposed to be doing. I think that there should be a medium in there to where we find a medium in there for the assault rifles and at the same time being held accountable. Because a lot of times it doesn't end up in the white neighborhoods, it ends up right here in our communities. I mean, they have all this stuff up there, but on January 6th, when they had the insurrection up there in the White House Capitol, they didn't shoot at the whole bunch of people because there's a lot of white people, right? One person got shot. Whereas they had all this stuff out there for the Black Lives Matter, and they were doing peaceful protests. I use that as an example. So therefore, we can't take away everything from the police to be able to do their job. At the same time, we can't give them everything. Like, you should be able to have allowed them to have the tasers, allow them to have the beanbags and the things that they can use that are less deadly. But at the same time, they are outgunned. And if we start holding other people accountable for the work that they're supposed to be doing, like I couldn't even get crisis to come out here, which is their job for mental health, but we had to call the police, and they were able to deal with it in a compassionate way. So we need to find a medium up in there and stop allowing people that do not live in San Francisco, white people that don't live in San Francisco, to always speak up for San Francisco when it's not for us in the first place. And so it's going to cause more harm to our communities. And so that's my 2
Speaker
cents on the whole
time has
thing.
elapsed. Thank you. That was our last caller for public comment.